March 2020, the world changed.
Breaking news tonight, millions of Americans ordered to shelter in place as the coronavirus pandemic spreads.
November 2021, the world tentatively has reopened. Schools are back in session, downtowns are once again filling up, and people are going, often reluctantly, sometimes just part-time, back to the office. But in many ways, the world has changed forever. We feel disruption in every part of our lives. In the next hour, we'll explore focus, disruption, how the pandemic has affected how we learn.
Thousands of students are preparing to go back to school this week.
Our mental health.
As we are all struggling with extraordinary circumstances.
How we work.
3.2 million Americans seeking unemployment benefits.
The state of our world.
If we resist taking action now, that goes into the worst case scenarios.
How we process information and misinformation.
Removing 18 million COVID-19 falsehoods so far.
We'll hear how Montclair State University media platforms are banding together to cover this once-in-a-lifetime story. The Montclair newspaper, the Montclarion.
It's our job to tell these stories.
The student radio station, WMSC.
Follow WMSC throughout the year for more focused disruption content.
The new Strategic Communications Center, Stratcom.
Using these kind of tools are extremely helpful.
The Red Hawk Sports Network.
We are live from Sprague Field.
And Montclair News Lab.
We start with a series of conversations with thought leaders on disruption.
From the News Lab at the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University, this is Focus, Disruption, the Kickoff.
Welcome to the Focus Disruption Kickoff. My name is Brittany Stegwa.
And I'm Louis Biantilillo. Today we're covering everything that's changed since the pandemic hit all across the world.
And it has been a lot. Like we just previously said, this is a collaboration event between all the student organizations here at the School of Communication and Media, News Lab, the Montclarion, WMSC, and Red Hawk Sports Network.
And we'll be going through tons of different topics, and that includes education, misinformation, and so much more.
Giovanna Boggins, a producer here, is going to take us through a story of a woman who was affected through the pandemic in more ways than one.
Meet Jessica Bober. She was a makeup artist at Bloomingdale's when COVID-19 hit in March 2020 and was put on furlough.
There wasn't like a whole lot of information about what was going to happen. It was just like, we're shutting down, you're still going to get paid.
Months later, after she found out she was pregnant, she went back to work. But it took tolls, wearing a mask and worrying if her clients were infected while being in close contact with them. She feared for her safety and that of her unborn child.
Very stressful and dangerous and scary. And I'm not saying it was like any less so for anybody else, but I also was pregnant, so I was freaking out all the time.
Then, a month after returning to work, she developed preeclampsia, prenatal hypertension. Bober was put on bed rest and had doctor visits where she worried about becoming infected. But that wasn't the end of her troubles. At 37 weeks, she had an emergency C-section. She and her husband's hearts dropped when their baby was born and did not make a sound.
Oh my God, it was terrifying because he didn't cry.
Fortunately, her son Oscar's breathing stabilized. Her plan was to return to work and have her husband's parents watch the baby, but her in-laws contracted COVID-19. Her mother-in-law recovered, but her father-in-law is still battling long-term effects.
It affected his brain somehow, and that's something that we're still dealing with and he's still recovering from.
With no money for daycare or jeopardizing her child's health,
a brand new baby, wasn't going to risk that.
Bober quit her job to take care of her son. No unemployment checks and income only from her husband. This family could not afford to live on their own and moved in with her husband's parents. Bober's year and a half of misfortune tracked the havoc that COVID was wreaking on the country. Job loss, financial insecurity, fear, stress, a breakdown of everything normal. Shea Richburg is a futurist, a person who studies patterns to make predictions about the future. She says we can expect to become less reliant on other people and more on technology.
So everything is about connecting us all over. And the way to do that is through the internet. So you're going to see that change. You're also going to see a lot more learning through technology.
Richburg foresees a mixed future. People working at home some days and in the office on others. Park Rhodes, an education technology futurist, says virtual or augmented tools will become commonplace. We can all bring each other back together into one room and experience something. Through augmented reality, reality, users can visualize themselves in an environment, possibly through a smartphone. Virtual reality users wear goggles and are instantly in another place. But it goes further. Imagine chips implanted in people that are connected to medical computers that provide constant analysis of your health. As for Bober, she is working as a freelance makeup artist, and her family of 3 is settling into living with her in-laws. She's optimistic, but realistic.
It's just like taking reluctant steps to try and keep our heads above water. But, you know, we have to do what we have to do.
For Montclair News Lab, I'm Giovanna Boggins.
With us today is Dr. Luis Portes from the Feliciano School of Business in the Department of Economics. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Portes.
Luis, a pleasure to be back.
And we've spoken plenty of times about economics.
Plenty, right at the beginning.
Exactly. So things have completely changed in the past 2 years. One of the biggest things that's changed in the world of economics is people wanting to work from home. Can you speak about why they want to do that?
Yeah, actually I was thinking about the name of the program today. I would call it Reset.
Reset.
Actually, what has happened in society, and not only in the US, but everywhere in the world too, people have taken a different approach to what they used to believe, think, and want to do. So in that regard, the job place, it's a different location now. So going to the office, it's a matter of debate, it's a matter of safety, in a different dimension than before. So that basically has been the difference. There's a structural shift towards what we used to consider normal, and it's a reset where people are taking different decisions.
And there's always going to be some people that have to go into the office, right?
Yes, there is, and actually, as you introduced me, I'm in economics. One thing that we get sort of ahead of time to see where things are moving towards is pricing. Right before coming to the program, I was having lunch watching TV, the financial channel, and there's an increase in rents in New York after dropping very largely.
A lot.
With people upgrading for a lower price.
Right.
Now it's increasing again, and one of the reasons is that big companies are renting space, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, and they are expecting some people to work there as well. So there is demand for commercial space and the people that are going to occupy that space.
So you think there's going to be a shift in the city of how we do business?
Yeah, I guess it's the frequency of showing up to the office that will be changing. Now, almost everywhere, and surveys of CEOs, what they show is that they want people in the office. It's the spontaneous coming up with ideas, the camaraderie, people that you don't get to speak as often as you do on Zoom, you run into each other. So there is a back to the office movement that won't be as strong as before, but surely it won't disappear.
If everybody's working from home, does that change the way that a business runs? Because like you said, you don't have that spontaneousness.
Yeah, there are a bunch of studies going up. Some are saying, well, because there's more of transaction costing, coordinating people, delegating. In some cases, they have found a decrease in productivity. But in other cases, since people have more energy, first because they don't need it to commute, and they have more time, productivity has increased in other studies. So it's still mostly out there. What is going to be the final effect? Most studies shift more towards it's going to be beneficial for companies in terms of their output.
And I know sometimes we're seeing some people work 2 days a week in the office, 3 days home, things like that. Is that the new normal, the quote unquote new normal?
Yeah, let's call it like that.
Okay.
Yeah, a hybrid system of both. And people lean towards 2 or 3 days a week in the office.
So has anything else changed? We know that a lot has changed, but what else has changed since the pandemic with businesses and working?
Yeah, the bigger thing that has everybody worried for the implications of it has been the drop in participation of people in informal jobs. So the labor force participation rate, as it is called, has decreased. People were expecting that once Labor Day came and the federal unemployment insurance top-off would disappear, people will show up again for work and looking for jobs, and they haven't. So that is one thing that has disrupted not only the general economy, but specific sectors that compound on each other. Just the example of the automobile industry. There was the chip shortage, right? Car companies needed chips to make cars.
Right.
Then you have the supply chain bottlenecks on ports, where ships are stranded in the Pacific Ocean.
The whole supply chain. And you know what, Dr. Portes, I'm going to be talking about that in our next story
super.
Here. So it is always a pleasure speaking with you.
Same, Luis.
Thank you so much for coming in. I wish I could shake your hand, but things have changed a little bit.
Distance.
Little fist bump.
Take care, Luis. Thank you very much.
So everything has changed in the workforce, and that includes people not going into work like we were speaking about, but also there has been a labor shortage. I set out to find out what's going on and when it's going to end.
This is the Rathskeller on Montclair State's campus, the former home of the university's pizza place and made-to-order salad station. They haven't seen customers since before the pandemic. But why? It's all part of a larger, nationwide labor shortage that's interrupted business everywhere.
As America reopens, many businesses now face a new challenge, bringing back workers and doing it quickly.
They are desperate to find workers, especially in the food business in New York City.
According to Dr. David Axelrod, an instructional specialist at the Feliciano School of Business, there's something bigger at play.
In labor economics, we use the concept of a reservation wage. Like, how much do they have to be paid before it's worth their while to go back to work?
Reservation wage increased in the past 2 years. That's due to a variety of factors, like office safety, childcare, and certain employees not wanting to commute to work. Ashler Salam, the director of operations for 2 Philly Pretzel Factory locations, says the issue stems much farther from their own team of employees. The supply chain has been interrupted internationally.
There's just less people picking specific kinds of jobs anymore that allow all this stuff to kind of gel together.
It's going to take 10 days to offload the 6,200 containers on this ship alone.
The pipeline of goods from China to the U.S. consumer is running at the pace of a turtle.
They need truck drivers to show up. They need orders to be put in to get these goods onto the highway and into stores.
It affects not only what we're ordering, we don't even know sometimes what we're actually going to be receiving, and then we have to adjust on the fly.
The U.S. is facing bottleneck after bottleneck in the supply chain, and these delays are causing slowdowns across almost every industry. Ports are struggling to keep up with their shipments.
The Port of Los Angeles announced today that it's going to begin operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Today's announcement has the potential to be a game changer.
Despite the president's announcement, dock workers are reportedly being called into work the same amount they were prior to it. And even if that plan did take action, there's another issue. There's a trucker shortage of over 80,000 workers, preventing goods from getting to where they need to be.
We're just used to, you go into the store and there's the finished product. As long as you got the money, you get it.
As for Ashler Salam, the Philly Pretzel Factory director, the current situation is twisting his business like a pretzel.
But if we keep raising prices, it doesn't mean we'll lose everybody, but then they'll come less frequently.
An economy struck by a worldwide pandemic that's affecting everyone.
Thanks, Louis. I'm now joined by Dr. Christopher McKinley, who's a professor here at Montclair State and an expert on how mental health is affected by social media. Thanks for joining us, Dr. McKinley. So my first question is, how has the increase in social media affected our mental health during the pandemic?
Well, there's always been, for years now, there's been research looking at the links between social media and mental health. And there is a small negative relationship between social media and poor mental health, which seems surprising, right? If you think about increasing feelings of loneliness and depression. Prior to COVID-19, one of the arguments was that it was related to social comparison. So people comparing themselves to others on social media that were doing all these fun, cool things, and they felt like they were maybe missing out. During COVID, there's some other explanations that we could talk about. One being this issue about the information that people are getting, all the misinformation is creating more uncertainty, increasing more levels of stress, anxiety. The other argument is that the relationship may be kind of flipped around, which is people feel more anxious, more stressed, more lonely, so they're using social media more. But it feeds into kind of that larger perception that perhaps there is this link. One of the things I think we don't clearly know is what aspects of social media are maybe triggering this decline in the concerns over mental health?
So obviously during the pandemic, we relied heavily on social media to stay connected with family, friends, even in school, we use Zoom. And you talked a little bit about this. Now, do you think that there are benefits to schooling with online schooling and?
Okay, so a little bit in a different area in terms of education. Well, I mean, one of the things that in 2021 versus, this has happened in the 20th century or even 10 years ago, is at least we had a technology option to kind of complement existing situations. And in some contexts, it could be useful for individuals. So there's potential benefits of the online in certain contexts. But I think that, I'm not an education professional to kind of speak on that behalf, but I would say that the preference it seems to be for face-to-face learning in many cases. But of course, there are circumstances where people benefit from the option of an online experience.
And moving forward, we've seen different implications being input, like I know one thing called BetterHelp, which is a social media tool that it's helped with anxiety and helps connects therapists with patients. Do you think we're going to see a rise in that?
Yeah, and I think one thing that gets left out of this discussion, because there's so much focus seems to be on the negative relationship, is the potential for particularly more specific aspects of social media, or M-health even. We sometimes call them mobile health apps, in helping promote better mental health. And there is some valuable research on that and the potential positive impact. We're going to see people being more comfortable now using the technology because they were so dependent on it during COVID. They may actually benefit from the online sources of therapeutic resources and things of that sort.
Yeah, and being home, you talked about like comparisons a lot, and I personally, suffer from some mental health issues, and comparisons definitely hinder that. Do you think there's a way for people to confidently use social media without those negative effects hindering their mental health?
Sure. I mean, I think obviously it comes from having a strong support network, but also the more media literate and kind of information literate we become, and being aware of the ways in which people present themselves in very strategic, selective ways in those platforms, and just kind of reflecting on that can be very useful in various ways. And I think we can think about ways in which we use social media for very targeted reasons, and trying to chat with our friends and family members about kind of the maybe unrealistic presentations that are there as well, to kind of ward off some of the negative effects.
So do you think that this is something that should be taught maybe in schools, maybe in college, have a certain social media class?
Right. Well, I think it broadly connects to media literacy, which is a theme that I think in the school we try to promote in many ways. But I think, and this is something I talk about in my classes, whether that should be actually implemented at a younger age, and I think absolutely so, given the high number of youth that use social media at a very young age, and some of the concerns in terms of social media being linked to things like negative body image and things of that sort. There's a push from certain areas of the education community to integrate media literacy in middle school or high school, and I would be supportive of that. I think it'd be really beneficial for kids, and I think they'd be really drawn to it and interested in it. And the key aspect of that would be the social media element.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. McKinley, for joining us. I loved hearing your input.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, so the Montclarion is a newspaper here at the School of Communication and Media and our university newspaper. And reporter Emma Coughlin takes us into a meeting to show us how the Montclarion benefited from the pandemic and how they became better.
Okay, so I know that you guys were a lot more involved when everything shut down and COVID completely changed the Montclarion. Can you tell me what happened?
I had just started assistant entertainment editor. Then everything shut down, and my first thought was, oh, I just got this good thing going. Now what? What's gonna happen? I think that was like a huge question that everybody had, was just, now what?
For news, it was especially difficult to find stories to cover because we cover a lot of what's going on campus, and nobody's on campus.
So I know we went completely online. Do you think that was more of a problem in the beginning? And do you think it continued to be a problem, or do you think we're better from it?
I think that it's only helped us, because now we're posting throughout the week instead of saving it all for like a big news dump on Wednesdays before our paper comes out. We're posting every day, we're posting as things happen. We're getting more likes, or we're getting more views, we're getting more interactions. We're doing online ads, we're now doing social media ads, so I think it's only helped to expand Montclarion.
The one good thing about the pandemic has been watching us grow as like a digital organization and just really stepping up our social media, our website, and everything involved with that.
Because now we're not just reaching people that are walking by our stands on campus. You know, we're reaching people, if we really wanted to, all over the country.
I think we really did a good job of kind of turning around everything and getting back to where we were, but also better than where we were.
Mm-hmm. Being back is so much fun. Last year I feel like we really missed out on that like community, really close, tight-knit feel that I'm learning that we have. I mean, we've just been having a blast.
I think coming back and having that sort of team and community that we've built has been really awesome, and I'm actually really thankful for it on like a personal level. It's just nice that all these people are here and we get to hang out and have fun, and then also create something like really cool and be successful at it.
Yeah, I had never been in the office before. Honestly, now Wednesday's like my favorite day of the week, our production days, because I just love seeing everybody and working on the paper and producing something that I'm really, really proud of. And I've made some of my best friends because of the Montclarion.
This year's focus is Focus Disruption, which is basically the effects of the pandemic on the world today. The topic itself, disruption, is very broad. How do we as an organization kind of plan on reporting that and being a part of that collaboration within the school?
There's so much to cover these days. There's so much that's been affected by COVID, and disruption really helps us get a variety of stories out there that really address student concerns and the way their lives are changing post-COVID.
No matter what, everybody's going to relate to it. This is something that everybody can care about because it's happened to everybody.
Do we have any goals as an organization in terms of covering focus?
I think the biggest thing is telling these stories and getting that human interest aspect. If that makes, a change, or it makes people want a change, then that's what it does, and I think that that's the beauty of journalism.
Every student has really been affected by COVID, and every student has a story to tell, and they're adapting to this new world. The world's changing and they're adapting to it, so I feel like it's our job to tell these stories and tell stories that students can relate to.
We're the student voice of Montclair. So I think that that's kind of should be our goal, is like just being a voice for them in a world that's like not really listening.
We're coming back, we're doing our printed paper every week, so I mean, the pandemic kind of brought us down, but I think we're coming back stronger than ever.
Now, Louis, you and I are part of the News Lab team here in the School of Communication and Media, and watching that, seeing how the Montclarion works their programs and how they come up with ideas, it was really interesting.
Absolutely, and since we've been here, new and innovative ideas have been coming back ever since we've been back to school from COVID.
Yes, and speaking of back to school, we're going to talk to Solana Brohl, who is going to show us how kids in high school and college accustomed to coming back to school after the pandemic.
When Patricia Sugling, a teacher at Warren County Technical School, returned to class, one thing about her students stood out.
They've lost what it means to be in a school and how one should act when they're there. We've been having a lot of kids doing things, following TikTok trends, things like that are just either illegal or just very inappropriate for a school.
Her students are not alone. K through 12 or university, educators are grappling with these transitions. Emily Isaacs is the executive director of the Office of Faculty Advancement at Montclair State University and specializes in teaching higher education.
We have to figure out how to make learning more active and engaging. One idea that's pretty popular and has been around for a while is this notion of flipped learning or active learning, where more time is spent in classroom in active learning, where you're talking to somebody next to you, where you're working on your math problem, getting feedback from your professor in real time in the classroom. So I think making sure that the classroom experience is always valuable
Jocelyn Pearson, a senior at Warren County Technical School, had concerns of her own about returning to in-person classes.
It was very nerve-wracking at first because you really don't know what people are going to be like when you come back, because after such a long period people can change, things can change. You haven't seen people, you haven't talked to people.
One big change, a much larger focus on mental health resources.
We've made a wellness room. We've hired another counselor that lives in the wellness room and is always there for kids to be able to come and talk or just take a break. We've added a therapy dog program. There's been a lot of resources on the education side, on the learning loss side.
The universities, including ours, they're hiring more psychologists, they're hiring more social workers. Now I think there's much more of an effort to have students have psychological support counseling while staying in school.
Some see a post-pandemic increase in kindness.
I like that people are more understanding of people, and that they understand that certain people, they don't want to be touched, they don't want to be close to others. Some people, they get anxious when there's a lot of people around. I like that we're taking actions now to clean places more, so now there's more sanitary factors.
I think it just is going to require patience and understanding. I know at our school, they're really looking at the whole student, not just grades and when things are due and whatnot. They're really factoring in the whole child, like I said. So I think that's something that, is going to have to continue to be the case.
For Montclair News Lab, I'm Solana Brohl.
Now, we've done our own research here at Focus Disruption. We asked our followers on Instagram how they were affected during the pandemic. Sarah DePippa reports.
Without a doubt, COVID-19 has affected our lives forever. On social media, we asked our followers how their lives have been disrupted. Let's take a look at what some of the students had to say. User 1 wrote, "Mental health-wise, this past year has been terrible. I felt so disconnected from the outside and felt isolated. This sets someone who struggles with anxiety back by a lot." This was not the only student who said that their mental health was affected by the pandemic. 70% of respondents wrote that their mental health took a toll due to the pandemic. User 2 wrote, "My mental health absolutely declined. I broke out badly, my eating habits were changing, and living on campus that year was so depressing. The only time I'd leave my dorm was to get mandatory testing once a week. It was stressful and put a lot of tension on my roommate and I. #Focus Disruption." In terms of work and education being affected, students' college experiences were cut short and many were laid off from their jobs. User 3 wrote, "School has been disrupted the most. My major is hands-on and I felt like I was behind with my online classes." User 4 wrote, "I missed a year and a half of my college experiences. My parents are both essential workers, including my mom, who's a nurse, and my dad, who's a postal worker, whose benefits were threatened." If any of you related to the survey results, please comment on our Instagram page at Montclair State Focus using the hashtag Focus Disruption and share how the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted your life. Thank you, and back to the News Lab.
Thanks, Sarah. That was a lot of helpful information. Right here at the School of Comm, we're always looking for new ways to evolve and to bring new rooms and services to this specific building for our students. And we just debuted a new center. It is called the StratComm Center. We have the head of it right now, right there in the StratComm Center, Keith Green. Throwing it over to you to tell us a little bit about it.
Hi everybody, I'm Keith Green. I'm the coordinator for strategic communication here in the School of Communication and Media. And welcome to the Joetta DeBella and Fred C. Sauter III Center for Strategic Communication. And part of this great center are some amazing analytics tools that students, faculty, and staff now have access to. And I'm going to throw this over to you folks so you can roll the tape and see this demonstration. So what I've done here for you today for demonstration purposes is selected a topic around the coronavirus. I want to share a little bit about the listening aspect of Sprout Social. And you can see up here in the upper right-hand corner, I have selected November 5th through November 15th for us to take a listen as to what is happening around this topic on social media across many different platforms and the web. You can look at the total number of volume of posts, number of engagements within those posts, average engagement per message, and how people are feeling about this topic, among other things. If I scroll down here, I can look at some of the other Potential impressions, again, looking at the volume by day and when people are engaging by the day of the week. And if you look down here, I really like this feature. Again, how are people feeling about such a topic by date? So you can see positive is sort of that light blue teal color, negative is purple. Now this could be related to news. This is where you can dig deeper into something. Maybe a big news story came out and people are feeling more positive or feeling negative. Then you can look at the number of engagements. And then sort of look at a sentiment summary. Like I said, 58% of the folks feel not positively about this. And this can also be used actually from a brand perspective. So say your brand is coming out with a campaign, or you're having an event and you're creating hashtags or topics or themes around those events, or around those campaigns. You can track something like that here and get very brand specific. So moving back up to the top here, there are a couple more things that I want to highlight that I think are really neat. So if we look at this conversation and hit on this particular tab, you can look at some of the different emojis that people are using around this topic. But you can also go through here and take out emojis and take out hashtags and look at what people are saying as well. Now, what I have done here to further narrow this category and for purposes of this discussion is to maybe make it a little bit more relevant to us, is you can go through and look at different themes. But what I've done here is themed the conversations around education and higher education. If we're talking about coronavirus and universities and students, you can see something that came up here. There's a tweet about this. And then again, you can just follow all these and it might provide some really interesting insights into a topic or again, a brand or a campaign once you start to get this granular. Okay, so one thing I want to share with you is demographics and how that is broken down. So you can see by topic, you can see the age range. So you can see where this sentiment is coming from in terms of male versus female breakdowns. Device demographics, which is really interesting, how much it is happening on mobile versus a web-based, meaning sort of a laptop. And then really granular iOS versus Android, which is really pretty interesting. So again, you can look at the demographics of a certain topic as well. So thanks to the university's investment and the generosity of our donors, students, faculty, and staff will continue to have access to great tools like Sprout Social and many others as we move forward. All of this will help prepare our students for the data-driven and analytics world that we now live in, giving our students another opportunity to get those first internships and first jobs and prepare them for the future. Thanks very much, and back to the desk.
Thank you so much, Professor Green. Thank you for the demo. And now on to the topic of misinformation. I'm joined here today by Dr. Bon Benton. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Now, Dr. Benton, you have a doctorate from Vienna University, I believe. You used to work in the State Department, and you've been published extensively for your misinformation in the media. So I just wanted to ask you, why do you think there has been a rise of misinformation in the media due to the pandemic?
I think that, of course, people are online a lot more, and I know that it's been said earlier in the broadcast that a lot of people are very uncertain. I think that in that nervousness, people are desperately looking for answers, and if they look for answers, they're not necessarily going to find good answers, but they're going to find answers that make them feel a lot better. And I think that this has been one of the biggest things, is that we have people really struggling with issues like mental health and uncertainty. Clear answers provided online, even bad answers, I think are finding more traction than they would have before.
Now, you mentioned this a little bit in your answer, and I was just going to ask, do you think that the issue that we're having with mental health is directly correlated to the rise in misinformation that we're seeing on the media?
I think that there's certainly some overlap with that, is that as people become more strained, things that maybe you would have dismissed instantly. You know, if there's someone that comes up to you shouting a conspiracy theory on the street, you run away very, very quickly. But the same kind of conspiracy theory with an authentic looking logo attached to it in social media all of a sudden kind of becomes compelling. And that filter that maybe you had pre-pandemic, it's just been so worn down by the lack of social contact, that filter's not there anymore to evaluate information. And that's really driven a lot of people towards it, I think.
Now, do you have any advice to sort of minimize that insecurity, and have any sources that you would suggest to our viewers that they can look at that they know they trust?
In terms of sort of doing your own research, that unfortunately has become, that's a term that I think has really been exploited by the people pushing this misinformation, is they'll say you need to do your own research, you know. A group of scientists from MIT come out with something related to COVID abatement. You know, they're going to say, well, you can't trust it, you need to do your own research. But then very often they're going to direct you towards certain sources that reinforce the conspiracy. I think that the ability to search independently is really, really important. I would also strongly encourage people to be really nervous about recommended links because the algorithms really kind of pull you down the rabbit hole, and you watch one video and the next suggested video is based on how long you watched the previous one, and before you know it, you've watched one conspiratorial video, they've given you 1,000, and all of a sudden the absolutely non-credible information suddenly seems reasonable.
Now, onto those, related links, apps like Facebook, Twitter have moved to sort of working towards minimizing misinformation that's been spread on their applications. Now, I'm not sure how much you know about what they've done, but what do you think they can do to better enforce this sort of lack of misinformation on their platforms?
I'm kind of cynical. I'm really cynical about this. Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower who's kind of been made public, she sort of confirmed what we've been researching for some time now, which is that Facebook and platforms like Facebook benefit from hate, misinformation, and extremism. If you see kind of a cute story, you'll watch it and move on with your life. But if you get pulled into conspiratorial or hateful communication, you might stay on the site for hours. That's eyeballs, and social media as it is right now, eyeballs equal money. And she said as much. And she said that most of the attempts at minimizing the amount of misinformation and hateful extremist content that you see, that it's mostly window dressing, that they're doing it to make sure that they don't get in trouble and that they don't get regulated. But for the most part, they're really not cracking down. She provided a study that I think is really, really useful, and it kind of confirms a lot of the research that we've done as well with my great colleague and researcher Daniela Paterka-Benton here in Justice Studies, who I do a lot of this research with. Facebook found that only about 8% of misinformation is actually caught online. And so that just means that the vast majority of it kind of like gets through. And even if you don't, even if you manage to kind of crack down on it, they're really clever. The extremist and conspiratorial folks, they can put codes on it that make it very, very difficult. So they'll start using a new word for the conspiracy that will draw people in without overtly advertising the conspiracy. It's a cat and mouse game, and I don't think the social platforms are good faith actors to really stop this.
So we've seen a lot of misinformation in things like vaccines and climate change. What do you think our viewers can do on their own? Again, like you said, this is something that's really hard, to educate themselves in a way that they can be able to be presented with this misinformation and know that it's not a site that they should trust.
I think that that misinformation very frequently begins with sort of clickbait, right? Like that there's the stereotypical clickbait of child stars, where are they now, right? But there's also like the clickbait where COVID cure suppressed, FDA says. If there's a headline that just seems way out of whack with other information that you see, I would be hesitant to click on it. I would also say that for a lot of people, there's the well-intentioned attempt to counter misinformation by responding to it. We have a saying, and I hope it's not too crass for the viewers here, but we say don't touch the poop, right? That you respond to it, and in the act of responding to it, you give it more views. It increases like the likelihood it's going to be seen. Maybe your friends see it because
and maybe
you
they're
click
even
on it.
monetizing from it.
Yeah, exactly. So in some ways, I think that we want to respond to it, but the best strategy, I think, is to report it, but don't engage with it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us,
Thank
Dr.
you so
Benton.
much. It was
I appreciate
wonderful.
your advice, and I hope our viewers do too.
Thank you so much.
Now, on to the topic of climate change. I had the opportunity to go down to South Jersey and interview Melody Randall, who was infected by the tornado that recently hit South Jersey. Take a look.
Severe storms have always taken place, but in the last few years, they have been hitting the coastal state of New Jersey hard.
I've lived in South Jersey all my life.
Melody Randall is used to storms in town, so the tornado warning on her children's first day of school seemed like any other.
We kind of equated it to a normal storm warning.
The family went about preparing dinner.
Around 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, warnings started to come across the screen, tornado warnings for the area, which we don't get that often. My son looked out the window about 5 o'clock and he saw that the clouds were getting darker and more intense.
Around 6 p.m., an hour after the warning, Melody looked outside.
So I told my husband, look, that looks, like there's a partial roof kind of flying around in a circle. He immediately said, that's a tornado, everyone get in the basement.
The family rushed to safety, and for 45 seconds, they piled on top of each other in the basement.
It got really quiet. We didn't hear anything. So then we proceeded to walk up the steps, and when we walked up the steps, we saw our entire home had been destroyed. One of the first things that I noticed is that my vehicle that was actually parked in the driveway was on the roof. Our entire front of the house was in the backyard. There was absolutely no wall in our family room where we had been gathered prior to the storm.
Melody's family had lived in that home for 15 years.
It was our a home that we built from the ground. All of our belongings were in a shamble, and the whole neighborhood essentially was destroyed.
The family lost nearly everything in the storm.
It was very difficult to see that everything that you've worked for all your life was kind of destroyed. I would never predict that in New Jersey we would have a storm to this caliber.
Coastal storms in New Jersey are common, but in recent years, the severity and frequency of these storms has spiked.
And I do believe is related to climate change.
New Jersey's had an unusual number of tornadoes this year.
Dr. Greg Pope is a professor at Montclair State University. He believes, like Melody, that climate change can impact the severity of storms.
Trends of those kind of weather events, like more hurricanes or more intense hurricanes, more of them over time, those are considered legitimate signals that the climate is changing.
Dr. Pope says that global warming is a sign of climate change.
Hurricane Ida gained more power, more kind of energy, fueling off warmer ocean water, which could be a product of global warming.
The impact of severe hurricanes and flooding was felt closely by Little Falls resident Bradley Demo. Demo has experienced 2 major flooding incidents in 3 years.
There's multiple homes in this neighborhood that have been destroyed, foundations and all, basement completely flooded, twice in the last 3 years now.
Demo was out of state during the first flood in 2018 when he received a call from the Little Falls Police Department.
My vehicle at the time was either missing, flooded, gone. The water level was well above the engine, so it completely totaled it, fried the electrical system.
The 2018 storm was devastating, but Ida made it look like child's play.
Ida gave us a lot more water in the street than the last one, and certainly a lot longer lasting.
Pope and Demo attribute some of the flooding to aging infrastructure.
It's particularly vulnerable because it is now no longer resistant to certain kinds of, extreme flooding that it might have been earlier when those types of floods weren't as common.
After the first event in 2018, there was proposals to install flood levees and flood walls along the Peckman River, which was the one that flooded that time. I know not much has been done in regards to that.
Locals felt hopeful at the idea of flood protection for future storms, but after Ida hit and no progress was made, fear for their safety lingered.
Our government, in theory, by its nature, is meant to help and protect the people.
Now that the new infrastructure law is going into effect and billions are flowing to large organizations, Dr. Pope says that people need to put pressure on the government.
They're as much on the hook for changing the way they do things. That can make more of a dent than collectively you and me.
For residents like Melody Randall and Bradley Demo, this is a matter of survival.
At one point during the tornado, my eyes were fixed open, anticipating death.
It's a real concern.
If anyone had any doubt about the effects of climate change, I would tell them to start to evaluate situations like we experienced in New Jersey.
One state, 2 regions, and countless communities facing the devastating effects of climate change.
Now, getting the opportunity to talk to Melody Randall and Bradley Demo, it is crazy to see how members of our New Jersey society are being affected by climate change every single day.
Usually we see these type of weather events happening all across the nation, across the world, but to have it right here, it's a little scary.
It is a little scary, and I hope that our viewers can watch this and realize that climate change is not something that we gotta mess around with.
And we're not the only ones doing climate change reporting. Our friends at WMSC, our campus radio station, are doing their own. So let's take a look with Kenny Horn from WMSC.
My name is Kenny Horn. I'm the producer of The Morning Buzz at WMSC 90.3 FM. For Focus Disruption, we talked to climate change activist Delaney Reynolds. She is the winner of the inaugural Teen Service Award from National Geographic. She's the founder, CEO of the Sink or Swim Project, and even introduced Hillary Clinton at a climate change summit. Here's our interview. You've spoken to some of the most important names in the country about climate change and what we need to do to keep our planet alive. What's the importance of talking to these influential people and getting them together to speak about climate change?
So it's really important that our world leaders are focused on and talking about climate change and its solutions, because quite plainly, I think that it's actually the greatest issue that the youth generations of today will ever face. And something that I often say is that how we as the youth go about solving it will define our time here on planet Earth. But of course, we can't do it alone. We're already seeing the impacts. We already need to be implementing the solutions. We can't wait for today's youth to take power or join the workforce. We have to start now. And the way that that happens is working with our world leaders. So it's really important for us to have discussions about what they're doing, how they can broaden it and do more, or if they're not doing anything at all, how they can get started. And ultimately, the goal with everyone that I talk to is how can we cut back and eliminate our fossil fuel use and carbon dioxide emissions. So that's a lot of what I talk about when I talk to these different leaders, and that's why it's so important.
We're going to change gears a little bit. One of the biggest reasons that I wanted you for an interview is because of how young you are. And it seems that climate change is something that has become a generational issue where people our age care more than the older generations. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. And I think it comes down to the fact that we're seeing the impacts more than they did when they were younger. We're dealing with them every day. So I talk a lot about sea level rise because that's my daily life living here in Miami, and that's a lot of what I focus on. But
sink or swim right there.
Exactly. We're going to have to sink or swim to get out of this. But so with the youth generation, we see this flooding. We see there's literally not a single city in Miami-Dade County, in Broward County, in Monroe County, the three big counties in South Florida, where when we have an extreme flooding day, there's not a single city that you can visit where you're not going to find flooding. Significant flooding up to my mid-calf, up to my kneecaps, which renders streets useless for driving. And like I've mentioned, you can't get into a lot of places. So we're seeing that and we're realizing, okay, we're living with this now and we're ever so slightly trying to adapt to it, but adaptation isn't the way that we're going to be able to live in Florida in the future. If we want to stay here in our homes from when we were young, if we want to continue to enjoy this beautiful natural environment, the Everglades National Park, the only type of habitat of its kind on our entire planet, we have to start thinking differently. We have to start implementing solutions that are actually going to fix this problem, not just let us continue to live with it as it gets worse. And I think that with a lot of adults, they just never saw that, or they think it's not going to impact me. It's not my problem. Can't see it. Don't want to deal with it. That kind of thing. So I think that we're just thinking more about our future than a lot of the older generations are.
Yeah, and something I also think is true personally, that quite often these older generations, I feel like they just see us like we're whining over things that are in their minds insignificant. How does pushing for change get affected by people who are older and have more power, sometimes not believing in what you're saying?
Yeah, so I got to be honest with you, Kenny, I don't typically concern myself with people who just don't see climate change as an issue, or they think that what the youth generation is trying to accomplish may be silly. I think it's a waste of time. And I prefer to focus on the people and the things that are going to move us forward. And luckily, that's most of the case here in South Florida. I think there's been a significant shift in people who maybe once upon a time didn't believe in climate change or didn't take the time to think about it, where now a lot of people are.
Follow WMSC throughout the year for more focused disruption content.
Thanks so much for the report, Kenny, and keep doing all that amazing work you're doing at WMSC. The that was awarded the best college station in the nation.
I believe so. Congratulations, guys.
Absolutely.
Now, we've heard from WMSC. Now it's time to hear from Red Hawk Sports Network, our last, but not least, student organization here at the School of Communication and Media. I'm going to throw it to Gianna DeGenis, who is in Studio A with the team. Gianna?
Hello, thank you very much. So come spring 2020, sports at Montclair State have been anything but ordinary. Hundreds of athletes were sent home with many questions and no answers surrounding the futures of their athletic careers. A year later, in an effort to make up for lost time, 13 sports teams from the spring, fall, and winter seasons had competed at 7 different venues over the span of 4 months, where coaches, athletes, and administrators had to navigate a minefield of chaotic scheduling, COVID tests on a weekly basis, and mask mandates. Whereas right now, the fall semester has pretty much returned to normal, but we're still seeing some of these consequences lingering. I'm Gianna DeGuinness, alongside Corey Annan and Jess Lipson from the Montclarion newspaper and Red Hawk Sports Network. And today we're going to be talking about some of those disruptions with you guys. So thank you for joining me. How are we feeling today?
I'm feeling great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks.
Awesome. So let's start out on a global scale. How has this drastic shift affected professional athletes from an emotional and a mental standpoint?
Yeah, so I'm actually working on a story currently right now about Montclair State athletes dealing with their mental health struggles. It's stories like that have really occupied the headlines recently and over the summer. We had Naomi Osaka withdrawing from the French Open, and then Simone Biles stepping away from the Olympics to focus on herself. And then more recently, we had Falcons receiver Calvin Ridley mid-season take a break from the sport that he's playing to focus on himself. And it's these prominent stories that have really been sparking a discussion in a topic that's been rather looked at as taboo. So I spoke to head athletic trainer at our campus, Tara Temple, about what the ways she's trying to implement, resources to help students at our campus deal with their mental health struggles. Whether it be in the classroom or on the field, these are college athletes in a really important time in their lives, and they need all the help that they can get. So it's really cool to see Montclair State taking the initiative to help them in various ways.
Absolutely, and
Yeah,
that
definitely.
transition into college, and especially, having to balance your classes and sports at the same time must be so stressful.
Very tough.
So aside from the mental health standpoint, what were some other season-altering disruptions that Montclair sports teams have faced?
Well, I can think of the men's basketball team. They had a spot in the NJAC semifinal, but unfortunately, due to COVID-19 protocols, they had to forfeit the game. And also the women's basketball team, they had to postpone their NJAC championship game to April because of COVID-19 protocols. So you can see both those teams really were affected by the pandemic heavily. I know Jess.
Yeah, I can add to that with the swimming and diving team. They had a really weird dynamic how they were competing virtually, so their opponent wasn't in the water with them. Of course, this doesn't. Yeah, it is really really weird. It doesn't, of course, work with a lot of sports, so speaking to a lot of them, they were very thankful that they had this opportunity, but a really weird dynamic in that.
And speaking of the field hockey team as well, I know those juniors and seniors, you would think they have a ton of experience behind them, but due to the pandemic, freshman and sophomore year, they didn't really play that much. In the junior year, they had the pandemic really, so it really affected them in terms of having a lot of experience on the team, and that that Coach O'Reilly definitely emphasized that throughout the season, that experience was a problem for them. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure with that experience problem, right, there was a shortened spring 2020 season, there was the canceled fall 2020 season, and then there was that spring 2021 season where everything was happening at once. So the NCAA is allowing athletes extra years of eligibility. How are Montclair State teams using that to their advantage this coming season?
Yeah, this is an extremely groundbreaking rule that we've never seen this before. Athletes getting a 5th year to play the sport that they love. It's been working in various ways. Kind of going off field hockey with that is Maddie Spilaric, a senior. She was coming here to finish out her semester, finish out college anyways. She was just able to, play her sport that she loves. And then more of a surprising story was we had UConn women's soccer player Zoe Steck. A year ago, she was playing at Division I level, and now a year later, she's getting her she's going to graduate school near her hometown. Really a surprising story there.
Yeah, awesome.
This was kind of a rule that really didn't just go for just the seniors. It was freshmen, sophomores, juniors. So we're going to be seeing the after effects of this rule play out, and it's going to be really interesting to see how teams take advantage of this. I know a story that we're working on is with the men's baseball team and how they're bringing back 5 seniors. So that's going to be cool to see.
Definitely. And so the Zoe Steck story, we saw how her presence had brought this new element to the Montclair women's team.
Totally.
And so again, with the men's baseball team, we're going to see this chemistry that they've already established over these past few years. And, you know, hopefully they're going to take that far with them. And so last question, we talked a lot about how sports have been disrupted. But how has this pandemic interrupted sports media coverage for you guys in the Montclarion and Red Hawk Sports Network?
Well, I guess speaking on the Montclarion side, we couldn't do in-person interviews obviously due to the pandemic, and you know, with that, you know, that dynamic between, you know, your athletes and coach when you're interviewing them is something really the same, and connecting with them isn't, you know, the same, and it's unfortunate you can't really do that.
I agree with that. Similar aspects. Not really. We weren't able to get as close, of course, as you'd like to those teams and athletes, and really get that, you know, bond and whatnot. So that was, of course, a big factor.
Yeah, and I know for the Montclarion, we couldn't have photographers at the game shooting photos, so getting photos was really tough. And you know, we had to, you know, scramble to do more creative things, but you know, we eventually have got a rhythm and we figured it out. So.
And I know my story for Focus Disruption is actually about you guys, you know, like the heroes behind sports media coverage. And so I've been watching back old episodes of Inside the Nest. Like you said, you were a weekly sports show covering sports when there were no sports on TV. You know, so
maneuvering through that was really
exactly, and
really
just
cool.
watching how you guys had to adapt to that scenario, and then seeing where you are now is genuinely so amazing. You know, like just this thing that you guys have built. And you know how far you guys have come with the Montclarion. I know that was the crazy COVID semester was your first semester.
Yeah, and I know, and
as
going
a sports
into that,
editor.
Yeah, sports editor. So we only had a few writers on the staff last semester, but you know, we've grown to be a 6-7 you know, staff writer team, and it's awesome to have, you know, writers contributing. We have photographers at games shooting photos now, and you know, we don't have to worry about using old photos from past years now. So it's a lot easier for us to, you know, be able to have the regular sports coverage that, you know, we are accustomed to. So
yes. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I wouldn't want to be at this table with anyone else.
Thank you so much.
We're going to pass it back to News Lab. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. And the Red Hawk Sports Network is actually one of the newest organizations here, and they're doing incredible, incredible work. Thank you.
They are. I really like their content. Anyway, as we come close to the end of our show, or the end of our kickoff, but don't worry, we'll have more. We wanted to throw it to our littlest Americans and what they thought about the entire pandemic, our miniature Americans, if you will.
I do not like COVID-19. I couldn't have class parties, graduation. It just stopped everything.
You can spend time with your family, but you don't get to see your friends as much.
We can't touch, we have to do air hug.
I don't really like it because I had to go on Zoom and I missed my friends.
My teachers being funny and seeing my friends.
June. Last year, it really affected my schoolwork because I wasn't really getting it on the computer. You can't do like partner work. Everything's independent.
If you cough or you sneeze, you're gonna spread eardrums and they're gonna get sick.
And so you have to make sure it covers like this part of your mouth.
So if you're sick and you cough, the doctors won't get sick.
Put it on this ear.
Let's say that I can run out to recess and shoot hoops.
We can easily communicate, and now we don't have to do everything digital. To be able to hear my teacher better.
Jen.
Getting the school experience than just staying home in your room, learning in person. That's what I really like about it.
Keep a distance.
Wash and sanitize my hands.
But if we ever go outside and we see other people not wearing masks, you can't copy.
Get a vaccine and wear a mask. You can do what we're doing, which is talk to people virtually.
I'm so sad that we're ending our show, but how could I be sad when I got to look at those cute little smiles
Really?
of the littlest members of our society?
Truly adorable. some of them were my little cousins, so I was glad to see them on the big screen.
Yeah.
I was interviewing them, and it was like the biggest thing ever for them.
Some of them were little members of my parents' church, and I remember seeing them when they were so small and like watching them talk about how they were affected in the pandemic. Watching these kids grow up has honestly been incredible.
Yeah, they keep growing and growing and growing.
I know. Oh my gosh, it like ages me just thinking about it.
Well, that's the end of our show, Focus Disruption, the kickoff.
It's the kickoff. We have our main Focus Disruption event. It's going to be in the spring, so you have that to look forward to. You get to see these smiling faces again, hopefully.
And we'd like to thank everyone who had anything to do with this production. That includes all the students involved in the control room, the professors, our reporters.
Thank you so much. I'm Bernice Degua.
And I'm Louis Beyond to the Low, and we'll see you real soon.
Stay safe out there.